Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of Rabbi Adam Kligfeld's weekly Rashi study class.
Hello to anyone who's listening to this on the Temple Beth Am podcast. And a mazel tov to Sandy on Julie's becoming bat mitzvah this past Shabbat. What a wonderful day in shul. Particularly if you were not in the sanctuary, you missed some beautiful Sephardi laning. To a Sephardi trip that's a little bit different to the standard Sephardi trip that I'm used to, which made it even more interesting. So it must be like a family trip tradition.
Did you hear that my mother had a different trope than my daughter?
Your mother had a different trope than your daughter. I did not catch that. They're just taught by different people or different.
My daughter was taught by Chaim Mizrahi, who was.
Get the microphone. If we're talking, might as well have everyone on the Zoom. Yeah, broadcast it to the world.
So my daughter was taught by Chaim Mizrahi, who was raised in Istanbul. So he's like folkloric, and he's now at Sephardic Temple, but I grew up with him in San Diego. So he taught my brothers. He did my wedding. He did my younger brother's bris.
Wow.
And then my mom has always wanted to read Torah. And as you can imagine, that was not available to a girl growing up in Mexico. So she taught herself online a few years ago from a different Turkish trope.
Wow. Wow. It was extraordinary. Okay, we are halfway through the Rashis on verse 4. So as is our custom, I'm going to read verse 4 again to get us going. All right, it's our annual confluence because we're on Parshat Bo. Thank you, Joel. Once even a broken clock is right twice a day, and even a slow Rashi class catches up with itself once a year. Okay, in a second, we're going to be on chapter 12, verse 4, but we have a update from the conversation last week about Samaritan Pesach. So I can't talk about it because I don't know what it is. So you go, Leonard, but take a microphone. If you were here last week, we talked about.
You can show it.
Okay, the Friedmans had been to Pesach with the Samaritans on Har Gerizim, and here we have the Haggadah.
And even people who speak Hebrew don't recognize this language, but that is Hebrew in the Paleo script, and that's how the Samaritans read and write in their liturgy and in the Torah. And it's not actually a Haggadah because they don't have any rabbinic commentary, so to speak. It's just all quotations from the Torah. And at one point I could read part of it, but I no longer can. I tried again this past week, and I found online a listing out there of the Samaritan script, but unfortunately there's characters in there that didn't appear in my guide. So I wasn't able to get very far.
But should it be a one-to-one with the Hebrew alphabet?
It is one-to-one with the Hebrew alphabet, yes.
Wow. But probably not intuitively so, right? Does something that looks like a shin, is it a shin?
The thing that looks like a shin is a shin.
Uh-huh.
But the thing that looks like a lamed is a kaf.
Wow. That's like in Bulgaria where this means yes. Fascinating. Thank you, Leonard. Thank you. Boker Tov, Carl. Your seat was saved.
I heard Alan mention Hebrew High. I actually remember in Hebrew High learning the ancient Hebrew script. So I could have at one point. We also learned Rashi script in Hebrew High, which I've also forgotten.
You've forgotten to write or to read?
To read.
Uh-huh. I remember when I went to yeshiva for a semester in college. As many of you know, I did not have a day school education. I had a good supplemental education in my small synagogue in Connecticut. My parents augmented that with some Hebrew study and some Tanakh study with private tutors. But I'd never studied text in the original. The way the yeshiva system works in Israel, at least when I was there, is like you just arrived whenever you arrived and just jumped into classes. It wasn't like a semester that began a certain day. So I just got thrown into a class based on my basic Hebrew level. And on day one, you're being asked to read Rashi and Rashi script. And I was like, what? Like, I know it looks familiar-ish, but it's amazing. If you don't know what an alphabet is, it looks like utter gibberish, right? Whenever I'm trying to teach Hebrew to someone who hasn't looked at it before, I hear myself saying the following words, but it's such an easy language. It's so arithmetic. Wow. There are 22 consonants and 10 vowels or so, and there's no guessing. There's no word in Hebrew like the word people, right? So it should be easy. But then I look at any alphabet that I've never learned. I'm like, how could I possibly master that? So there's a certain humility when you're looking at letters that don't mean anything to you, right? Even if they are technically simple. Okay. Let's go to the videotape. Let's go to verse 4. And I'm going to read the verse, and then we'll go to the second Rashi on the verse. V'im yim'at habayit mihiyot miseh. If the house has too few, such that it would be enough for a full seh, a full lamb, v'lakhachu ushcheno, then that one and or his neighbor, hakarov el beito, who is near to his home, should take the michsat nefashot. This is the word michsat that Rashi is going to talk about, but we already spoke about the fact that Onkelos translates it as having to do with counting, and we looked at several different possible core roots of this word. We're not going to go backwards in that discussion, but something like he and his neighbor should take with respect to the number of people, ish lefi ochlo, each person according to literally his eating ability, his appetite maybe. Rashi will talk about that in a second. Tachosu al haseh, and then they should, if you want to use the lechasod root, although it's not clear that's the right one, that they'll have enough for that seh, or something to do with they shall be counted towards that seh, that lamb. Okay, so, and we even discussed how some people believe, I think you were saying this, Leonard, that the word michsat and the verb tachosu may not even be from the same root. So so it's unclear, right? And that's you get unclear verses occasionally in the Torah. Onkelos translates it with the same Aramaic root, each of them having to do with minyan, counting. Okay, even uses the word minyan. All right, let's go to Rashi on b'michsat. It should be the second Rashi on that verse, and the Dibur HaMatchil is b'michsat. Everyone see that? Okay. Matt, are you in a place where you can read a Rashi?
No, I've got Sefaria up here, but it's in Hebrew, and I don't know my way around it, so I'll pass now.
Okay. Stevie, you want to read Michsat?
Thank you.
Let's give Stevie a microphone.
Michsat cheshbon.
Okay, so the first thing Rashi does is translate, right? If you, reader, are confused with what the word michsat means, Rashi says you're in good company. I'm just translating it to you. It means cheshbon, an accounting, a number, a check, as it were. Okay, and so this is a short Rashi where he's kind of saying a lot with as few words as possible. He throws us to a verse in Vayikra and Parshat Bechukotai, which I'm going to bring onto the screen. Where is it? Okay, this is from a very complicated section of verses. I find it complicated to lane because it's complicated to understand. And when you're a Torah reader with the blessing of understanding most of what you're reading, then there's a curse built into the blessing that once you're reading hard verses, it's hard to get the flow. And this is just really hard material. It has to do with biblical math in terms of determining the buyback and the return and the computed value of property that gets returned to a previous owner regarding the Yovel, the Jubilee, right? And so without getting too deep into it, the verse here, can everyone see it on the screen? V'chishavlo hakohen. So now you see that root, v'chishav. Rashi is bringing us to a verse that has as a verb chishav, which is the root of cheshbon, which is how we translated michsat, right? So I don't think that's an accident because the chishav means to make an accounting of. Choshev in the pa'al is to think. Lechashev means to compute, like a machshev, like a computer, literally, right? Think about originally, the reason why I call computers computer, because it was the original use of it was to do mathematical computations and things like that. The chishav lo hakohen, the kohen shall compute. It's even translated that way for him. At what should the kohen compute? Michsat ha'erkacha, The word ha'erkacha is also a very strange Hebrew word because normally in Hebrew, you don't have a noun that has a suffix, or once something has a suffix, think of it grammatically, it already has become a direct thing. So the ha at the beginning of ha'erkacha and the cha at the end don't work together, and no one really knows exactly how to translate it, right? So if I say your ball, you wouldn't say the your ball. It's either the ball or your ball. This seems to say the your value. It's hard to make sense of. It's translated here as the proportionate assessment. Fine, right? But the word that Rashi is talking about is the michsat, and the michsat is being translated here. Which translation is this? Is this Everett Fox? No, let's see how Everett Fox translates this. 1 second. Everett Fox translates it, the priest is to reckon for him the value of your assessment. So he's taking michsat as value. So Rashi is bringing us this verse to tell us michsat in that verse meant value. It also means value or amount in our verse, cheshbon. He doesn't say anything else about it. He just quotes us the verse as if by quoting the verse, we're like, oh yeah, that verse, I understand what it means. I import that meaning from that verse into this verse. Now our verse makes sense. The reason I find this an interesting proof text for Rashi, I think the use of the word michsat makes more sense in our verse than in the one in Vayikra. To my amateur eyes, I would proof text it in the opposite direction. But he finds the Leviticus verse easier to understand, and so he uses that as a proof text to clarify our verse. Okay? Any questions on that? Yeah, Leonard? Mike?
I was just going to say the hey is part of the word. It's not the. It's the verbal form of herich.
You think that this is a gerund, not a noun? You think it's ha'erachacha as opposed to ha'erech shocha? I've never read it that way. You could be correct. I'm not aware of translations that render that in English as if it were a gerund, not a noun, but you might be right. Like leha'arich, ha'aracha, ha'arachacha, and then it's ha'erkacha. Maybe I got to think about that. And let me think about that. It could be 100% right. Okay. Anything else on Rashi so far? Okay, Stevie.
All right. Tachosu. Sorry.
Lefiochlo.
Lefiochlo. Hariu la'achila parat la'chole v'zaken she'enu yachol la'achol kazayit.
Okay, as he translates, as we often do in Rashi, try to divine Rashi's question. He's giving you the answer without articulating his question.
He's creating, or more likely quoting, but a halachic conclusion that is drawn out of these words, that like we see here, that it has to be people that can eat, which excludes the sick and the elderly that are not able to eat a kazayas.
Okay, so right, even a kazayat. So he defines lefi ochlo, which we have translated as according to his eating, as hara'ui la'achila, one who is appropriate to be attached to the act of eating. What's his question? Maybe it's self-evident in your mind. It seems not even worth asking, but what's his question, Joel? What's the purpose of the word achlo? Right. Joel said, what's the purpose of lefi achlo, or how is it not redundant to what's already been told in the verse? If we're being told that the person and the neighbor, because they didn't have enough in their household to eat an entire seh, and we are going to learn later on that you're not supposed to leave any until the morning, and we're told that they're supposed to take a seh according to the number of people, then obviously it means according to other people and how much they're going to eat. So then what is lefi ochlo adding in terms of the material in the verse? And so Rashi, quoting a midrash, says this is adding a halachic point. This is not fleshing out the story, but adding out a halachic point. You need to count enough people according to the eating ability of people who are in the normal category of eaters, excluding right? Excluding Kobayashi and his hot dog eating, right? Excluding a choleh and a zaken, someone who is sick and someone who is old, who according to this understanding may not be in the position where they can fulfill their obligation of Korban Pesach by eating a kazayat, and therefore don't add them. So if you have, I don't know, let's say it takes 20 people to consume a seh, and you've got 20 people between your family and the people who live next to you. But of those 20, right, 2 are very, very old and 3 have the flu, then according to this computation, you only have 15. And you have to do the math correctly, because if you have a notar, if you have leftover, that becomes a sinful act. Carl, and then Rebecca. Let's give Carl a microphone and give Rebecca the other one so we can go. Yeah.
So this seems to introduce a potential major complexity. If you eliminate the people who can't eat much or any, shouldn't you also consider those who would like or could eat a lot? And so if lamb is enough for 20 normal eaters, it's only enough for, 15 big eaters.
Right. It's an interesting question. Judy, I don't know what this says about our people, but Jewish law is only and always interested in the minimum that one can eat and not the maximum, right? You're allowed to drink 6 cups of wine on Saturday night, but you must drink 4. You're allowed to have, 10 eggs worth of matzah, but you have to have at least, 1, right? So you're right. The tradition could have been that if you have, people with great appetites, then you might be able to not have to go to your neighbor to. Yeah, 4 teenagers. Yeah, but minimums are what the Torah seems to be interested in. Rebecca, Norm, Barry.
My question is, why doesn't he list children or babies as well that really can't eat?
See if you can answer your own question. In a halachic realm, why might children not be included?
Just because they're under 13.
They're not obligated. Right. So the question is, are they even eating if they're not obligated, and should they be right? So this is also like halachic thinking graphed onto a pre-halachic moment, right? Because we're in the verses that it's not clear. Are we talking about what the Israelites are being told to do that year and only that year, or is this also setting up a precedent going forward? If we accept that melange, that mixture, then, you could say that amongst the people who are generally considered to be chayav, obligated to eat a kazayat, those are the ones you would normally be counting to see, do we have enough for the seh? But within that category, there might be people who would be excluded because of their physical condition. And you might say that even though children could eat the Korban Pesach, since they're not obligated to eat, they don't get attached to the number to determine how many households have to be brought together. Now, practically speaking, if we're living in temple times, I don't know the answer to the question. I don't know if I'm an 8-year-old boy in temple times when Pesach was observed more like this than the way we do it, and people made a pilgrimage and they brought Korban Pesach and they found chaburot to share a set. I honestly don't know if the 8-year-old, I know the 8-year-old wasn't obligated. I don't know if the 8-year-old actually partook in it. If the 8-year-old partook in it, then you're right. It should be thought of as a mouth that's eating some of this. I don't know the answer. It's a good question. Norm, Barry, Marshall.
I think that even if in general, halacha concerns itself with the minimums, sometimes it does include maximums, and that's the case here, because you shouldn't have a lamb for that the number of people available to eat it will not be able to consume it.
Right. So it's considered both too many and too few.
If I were planning on serving lamb to my family of 2, I might think, okay, we can eat the equivalent of, 4 lamb chops.
Yeah.
Even though one of us normally doesn't eat mammal, but
never heard it said that way.
Have at least 2 bites to fulfill the mitzvah.
Yeah.
But there would be some maximum amount we could be expected to eat. And that's why if there's too much lamb, it's necessary to have bring in extra families.
Great.
And if I'm making a Seder for 30, I could use much more lamb, but the minimum would be 30 bites. And we could have other things beyond that. So I think in this case, it's very clear there is by implication a maximum. And probably in some families, everybody had one bite, and in other families, there was more than that, but there couldn't be so much that you wouldn't be able to finish it.
Yeah, good. I appreciate that comment. There ends up not being a shiur, a measurement of the maximum, but there's an implied maximum, which is why you have to go to your neighbor if you don't have enough people. By the way, did anyone in this group grow up being served lamb on Pesach? Did anyone ever have that tradition?
No. Not here, but in
Elon.
In the UK, they serve lamb on Pesach.
Really?
So every Seder that we had when we lived in London had lamb.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Wow. Norm?
I certainly didn't grow up eating lamb, but in 1977, I led a Seder at the Oakwood Garden Apartments. It was 78, one of those 2 years, in Toluca Hills or Hollywood Hills. And it was being catered by this Persian caterer who was really very good. He made a lot of Ashkenazi things, but where I'd always seen sometimes a turkey neck, but typically a shank bone with virtually no meat on it. He had this gorgeous lamb shank. And when he served everybody, he didn't serve me any meat on my plate. And I said, don't I get some of this? I don't remember if it was chicken or turkey or what. And he says, no, you're the leader of the Seder. You have to eat that.
Wow.
And I had never even imagined eating
from the shank bone.
From the shank bone on the Seder plate.
Yeah.
But I did because it was really important to him.
Yeah.
And he gave me some of the other meat as well, but I had that lamb shank and it was very tasty. And I felt this is really a new and different experience for me. And that's my one experience with that.
Wow. Fascinating.
I would love to repeat it, but I wouldn't do it on Pesach. Maybe on Pesach Sheni.
Yeah. Barry and Marshall.
First of all, how appealing is this to you, Rabbi?
Listen, the fact that I don't eat meat anymore doesn't mean that I don't desire. Right? You know, I have lost in my brain the taste and the appetite for certain flesh, but not all.
Good. So I'm looking at it from Norm brought it up, and also it's the same thing. The requirement is to make sure there's nothing left over.
Yeah.
So in calculating, you want to calculate how many people you're going to have, and this would include young people also. How many people you're going to have there to consume this lamb. And although the minimum is an olive size for each person, but there still may be more left over. So you have to calculate how many people of all ages and categories are you going to have to consume this to be nothing left over. That's the requirement.
Yeah, exactly. And you combine that with Rashi and the Midrash's sensitivity to words in a verse, which if they were absent, you still would have understood the verse. Then there must be a secondary meaning for it, right? And of course, I know we say this all the time, you have to imagine that these things go in both directions, talking to one another over centuries, right? So does this emerge from an ancient reader of the text saying, oh, Lafi Ochlo, that didn't need to be there. It must be telling us that this category is excluded. Or was some Judean in the middle of the 2nd century BCE, looking at the customs and realizing that as people were making their chaburot, they were not including, people who were not eaters. And does someone say, I can link that to 2 words in the pasuk. Let's attach that to Lefi Ochlo. Midrash went in both directions, and sometimes we can't uncover which direction it went. Was it discovering or creating law from the verses? We don't always know. Marshall and then Leonard?
Yeah, it's actually it looks like Rashi's quoting the Mechilta here.
Correct.
But there's another version of the Mechilta which says, Yatzu ha'choleh b'hakatan.
So say that in English.
Yeah, it excludes one who is sick or one who is a minor.
Very nice. Right. So Rebecca, Baruch Shekivant.
But interesting enough, the Gra
which is the Vilna Gaon
clarifies V'hazaken. So the Gra is recognizing what Rashi was saying there.
The Gra is the Vilna Gaon, Hagaon Rebbe Eliyahu. That's the Gra. So is the Gra there correcting from Katan to Zaken or adding in Zaken?
Well, just Hazakan.
Hazakan. So adding.
Hazakan, not Zakan.
Yeah.
Well, one has a beard, right?
Yeah. Related.
In addition, it says, that was from the next section here is actually from the Gemara itself. Shachatu shalola ochlav v'shalola manuyav, that they sacrifice it not for those who eat it and those who are not counted. And here it adds other terms, arelim v'latmeim pasul. So those who are uncircumcised and also those who are impure, who could not be have the right to eat it.
Good. Rashi's going to get into some of that in the next verse. Is this from Lifshuto Shel Rashi?
Pardon?
Is this from Lifshuto Shel Rashi? Yeah. If you want a secondary book that both makes learning Rashi easier, but it's not cheating, but easier, but also deepens it, that's an excellent 5-volume set because it basically is only focused on Rashi's comments on each verse. It's a Rashi to a Rashi. But it makes it easier in the same way like studying Talmud with an art scroll makes it easier, but great, you get the material in easier, but it also gives you other sources that Rashi's pulling from and deepens the conversation. And by the way, we have a set in the Beit Midrash in Pilchal if you ever have free time. Leonard.
It seems that Orach Chaim has a different opinion on this.
All right. Do you want me to pull it up?
Yeah.
Okay, on this verse?
Yes.
Okay, this is, I'm in the wrong verse. 1 second. It's Shemot 12:4.
It's the fourth comment of Orach Chaim.
Okay. Where are you? Orach Chaim from Vienna and Morocco and the land of Israel. We saw his grandson's grave, I think, in Fez. Not him, but someone related to him. Okay. Which comment? The fourth comment?
The fourth comment.
Okay.
Do you want that on the screen?
Yeah, I'm about to. I just want to open it first. Okay. You want to walk us through it? Or you want me to walk you? Look at it?
I'm just saying is that he's talking about the children and the wives and so on. Where he seems to be counting them in there where earlier we were excluding them.
So, okay, so this is a raw read. He quotes Lafi Ochlo Tachosu, that according to the eatability, you should count them. Yitba'er al derech omram. This can be elucidated based on what it said in Psachim, Masecha Psachim, page 88. Shochet Adam, a person slaughters al yedei beno, by means of, or I may counting his son, Uvito, his daughter, Haktanim, the little ones, V'gam al yedei ishto, even including his wife. Gam Amru, they also said a page earlier, Im hi lemuda lavo etzel aviha ochelet mishel aviha. If she is thought to or is normative to go eat at her father's home rather than her husband's homes, she should eat there. So she might be still accounted. You know, sometimes you still go home to your parents' home for Seder, but it's weird that you split up the family. Vehu omro ish lefi achal or ochel, and that's why it says each person according to the food, the eating. Perush al otam shehem regilim lavo etzlo. So he understands it to mean those that usually eat with you, not how much you eat, but the eaters in your family. And rely on that person's table, meaning their food. According to what they're going to count, imo b'sham kanuma komam, and there you acquire your place there. So you're right, disagreeing with Rashi. This is not limiting people who have lower appetites, but identifying where you're most likely to have Seder. Yeah, great.
What is the source?
Orach Chaim, Rabbi Chaim ben Atar, 16th, 17th century. Originally, I think in Vienna and then in Morocco, land of Israel. You were with us in Morocco, right? We visited a grave of his grandson, I believe, in Fez. It was the first grave. We walked into the Fez cemetery with Momo. Remember Momo? Yeah. The first grave he took us to was part of the Or HaChaim family, but I think the Or HaChaim himself is buried in the land of Israel. Wow. Yeah. Rebecca.
So, was it the case that in the future for sacrifices, people were able to witness a sacrifice, say done by the priest, without eating and partaking of it? Because if that's the case, maybe that's why it's important to say every person according to the eating, because they were going to eat this and that was somehow important. But it's not necessarily assumed that one would eat the sacrifice, because what happens in the future? Does everybody have to
different sacrifices, different rules? Pesach was consumed by the penitent. Was the food the korban Pesach was not eaten by the Kohen. The Olah was not eaten by anyone, because all of it was Olah ascending up to the heavens. And then some sacrifices, pieces of it were given to the Kohanim. So each sacrifice had different rules. But my understanding is that for all the years that both or either temple stood, the Kohen did not consume any of the korban Pesachs brought by the population. They were consumed by the people, right? And I think about it, it was the sacrifice in the year probably with the highest volume, because everyone had to bring one, right? So and they had to bring it and they had to eat it. I don't know what a Kohen ate Erev Pesach, but I don't think they ate leftovers from the peoples. Maybe they were obligated to their own korban Pesach. I don't know. We could look at the Rambam for that. Okay. Rashi has one more comment on Tachosu, but we already kind of discussed it. It's a one-word comment. He's basically quoting Onkelos, Tachosu.
Tit minyan.
Tit minun, right? From the word minyan, basically saying, if you haven't figured it out by now, reader, not only do I, Rashi, think that michsat is from a root that means counting, I also think the verb tachosu is from a word that means counting. Basically, I, Rashi, agree with Onkelos. Right? And again, the only reason he says that is because there must be people who didn't think that, right? Who think that those are two different roots. Okay. Yes, Alan. You got a mic? Choose your mic.
There's a comment here in the Saperstein about Rashi cites Targum Onkelos here to show that Tachsu shall not be taken as you shall count, but rather as you shall be counted. Additionally, Rashi teaches that this word is derived from the root to count, and not from the different Hebrew root akin to the Aramaic nachas, to slaughter. An alternative interpretation found in the Talmud Psachim 61a and 89a, and reflected in the Targum Yonatan Sifrei Chochamim. So I wonder if Saperstein is saying is that the bigger chiddush in Rashi's one-word comment by quoting Onkelos is not only to tell us the root, but the form, that it's a nifal as opposed to a pa'al. So I think that's probably accurate, because by the tit menun, I mean, Aramaic forms are not as familiar to all of us as Hebrew forms, but that form is more reflexive than it would be if it was straight. So yes, I think Onkelos is rendering tachosu as not you shall count, but you shall be counted. And that's what Rashi is reinforcing. Good. Thank you, Alan. Marshall Barry, and we'll go to the next verse.
It's interesting to me that as Alter translates it, Lefi Ochlo, he translates that each man according to what he eats and not according to the household.
Say that again.
That the Alter.
Oh, how Alter, right. Because Alter's translating the verse
Lefi Ochlo,
as it
eating.
looks, not, right. Alter knows Midrash, but is not not concerned with Midrash in his translation. My guess is that if you opened up the Art Scroll translation of this verse, anyone have an Art Scroll in front of them?
Silberman is saying, according to what each household.
That's how he translates the verse.
That's how the Silberman translates.
Right. So some translations, like Silberman and Art Scroll, will be likely to translate the verse such that it agrees with Rashi's commentary in the verse. Do you have an Art Scroll? Yeah. How does Art Scroll translate the verse? Let's get a microphone. Not the Rashi, but the verse.
The verse. I'm sorry.
Like read verse 4 in English.
Okay, 4 in English. But if the household will be too small for a lamb/kid, then he and his neighbor who is near his house shall take according to the number of people, everyone in proportion to his eating.
Yeah.
Shall you be counted for the lamb/kid?
Everyone in proportion to his eating, which is how Rashi understands tachosu al haseh.
Right.
Alter says, forget Midrash. What does the word mean? The word means each person according to his eating, right? So he translates accordingly. Translation is hard, folks.
Yeah.
And harder, but also more interesting when you have a Midrashic tradition. Barry, and then I see Sue's hand. Hi, Sue.
So this can it be simply understood that include yourself in the count, according to what you're going to eat, also.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, and that's the plainest way of reading it based on what the words look like, right? Sue.
My phone is ringing. I apologize about that. Hello.
It's not us.
Tachosu, I came in a few minutes late, but is it the same? Is it where we get the Hebrew word for meches, for taxes and customs when you come in? Like, if you're going through customs, you're going to go through meches, and you're going to get charged meches on whatever you're importing and that kind of thing. Is that the word?
We spent a lot of time on the possible etymologies of both michsat and tachosu last week, and the simple answer is there's a machloket, right? Some people think tachosu is from kaf samech samech, which may kasas, which may or may not be related to the word that becomes meches, having to do with taxes. You're right that meches seems to be about accounting, so it would work here, but it's not 100% clear what the actual root of the word is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Also, I just want to add, I see that Rebecca is there in person, and I'm sorry that I'm missing it to say hello.
Oh, okay. Which Rebecca? There are 2 Rebeccas.
No, the Rebecca that is usually on the screen from far away. That Rebecca.
Rebecca squared. Okay. Verse 5, folks. Look at that. Let's see who we not heard from today. We've heard from a lot of people. Sandy, you want to read verse 5? Okay, let's give Sandy a microphone.
Set tamim zachar ben shana yeh lachem min hakvasim umin haizim tikachu.
Okay, see if you can translate. And before you translate, I know that originally Hebrew was not pronounced with a Latina accent, but it just sounds so much better than an American Northeast accent. Oh, that sounds like almost the original.
There were so many years of day school that she had to threaten out of us to get us to, Okay. A perfect male lamb who is a year old. You should have. You can take it from the sheep or goats.
Yeah, good. Okay, so now we're getting more information about the qualifications of this sacrifice. In the previous verse has to do with amount. Now we have the description of the animal, right? So it's a seh. We've been using lamb to translate seh. We'll get more deep into that in a second. Tamim, you translated as perfect, right? Other words that you've heard translated tamim?
Innocent.
Unblemished, whole, complete, or simple, right? So I'm glad you said simple, because simple is very different than complete, which is going to be why Rashi tells you which one of those he thinks it means. simple we normally think of as tam, right? So the question is tamim, the same or different as the word simple? Where do we know the word tam from? Haggadah, right? I mean, you might know from other places as well, right? And the first tamim in the Torah, do you know the first tamim? No, Noach ish tzaddik tamim haya b'dorotav, right? So Rashi, I'm sure, commented on what tamim meant there. So Noach was an ish, a man. Tzaddik, he was righteous. Tamim, does that mean he was simply righteous or completely righteous? Is tamim modifying tzaddik? Are they two different things? There's a whole discussion of that there, but we're back into that word. Ben Shana, translated as a year old, it should be for you, and either from the sheep, kfasim, keves, o min ha'izim, or from the goats, you can take. Okay. Before we look at the Rashis, comments on the verse, anything you would ask on the verse if you were wearing a Rashi brain? What do you think? Tova. That's good.
Actually, I'm not sure this is a Rashi brain because I know he doesn't ask it, but I would ask, why Zahar?
Why is it significant, the gender of this animal?
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah. I mean,
good.
I can think of reasons, but the fact is, it doesn't occur to him to ask that question.
What are some reasons?
Well, I think a pragmatic reason would be that from a herding point of view, you can keep a healthy flock with fewer males than with females. That is, you can afford to sacrifice a male and still keep your flock growing, whereas if you were sacrificing the female, it would have more of an impact. So that would be a pragmatic reason. But a non-pragmatic, but also possible reason is just that Zahar male often is seen as more paradigmatic of things. So that is more paradigmatically a seh or a
Interesting. On your first potential answer to your great question, I was thinking that might be particularly apt here because everyone has to bring this korban, and you don't want to decimate the flock, right? Another thought I had, and I've never asked that question, which is why it's so great to study with people, because things come up that you never thought about. I wonder if it's also evocative and mirroring the slaughter of the firstborn males of Egypt, that the korban, every time you slaughter this seh, it's bringing you right back to that story. Just a possibility. I saw several hands. Sandy, that was that? Alan, Rachel, and then I see Rick.
I had always thought that the Korban Pesach was a lamb. And this is the first time that I've seeing that it could have been a goat. Now, is that the same in rabbinic times, that it could be the lamb or the goat, or was it always the lamb that was done in the temple?
Right. Well, I could answer your question annoyingly and say the English word lamb may or may not be the right rendering of the Hebrew word seh, and it might be that biblically seh might have been a generic term for a young one of a keves or an aiz. Now, once you get into English, seh becomes lamb, but it might have been that, it's going to sound weird, that if English existed back then, lamb might have been the word for both a young sheep or a young goat. But yes, halachically speaking, it can be either species.
So even during the time of the first and second temples, it could have been a goat.
Correct.
That was slaughtered.
I believe so.
I did not know that.
Who is next? Rachel? And then Rick. Oh, I see you. Okay. Now I see you waiting, Matt. So Rick, after Rachel, then Rick, then Matt, then I see Barry.
To build on what Alan just said, because that's what jumped out at me, was it never occurred to me that a goat could be Korban Pesach. Now, if a goat could be Korban Pesach, what does that make of Haggadah?
Nice. All right. Rick, Matt, Barry, Stevie.
Hi, I just wanted to throw in that the Egyptian god was the Amun was a male god. So and I think his thing was the ram. So that was also again an attack on the Egyptian gods. That we're stronger than they are and all that.
Great, Rick. Before Matt speaks, the last two comments reminded me. Some of you know when I was on sabbatical, and my first meditation retreat I went to was this place called the Holy Isle, this tiny little spit of an island off the southwestern coast of Scotland, owned by a Tibetan Buddhist order. And then on this entire island, which is about a mile long and maybe, I don't know, 2 football fields wide, the only things on this island, literally on the southern part of the island, is a convent where Buddhist nuns and the male version of that, what's it? Acolyte, something, monks are in silent retreats. The northern part of the island is this retreat center that you can come to that's almost entirely self-sufficient. They grow nearly everything that they serve. And then 3 species of non-fowl. There are a couple of wild ponies, like a couple, not 100, like 4 or something that just appear once in a while. And then a bunch of goats and a bunch of sheep. But the goats look like sheep and the sheep look like goats. So whatever you think of a goat looking like, when you see them on the Holy Island, they're sheep. And whatever you think a sheep looks like, when you see them, they're goats. So maybe they're actually both says. They're both. After the class, I'll show you some pictures. But it's wild. Like your brain, you're looking like that's a goat. Nope, it's a sheep. That's sheep. That's a goat. Yeah, I'll show you after class because it's really interesting. And they just kind of show up occasionally. Are you skipping the line?
Did we get Matthew?
Is it related to what I just said?
Oh, I'm just going to say the dictionary says that seh is either a young sheep or a lamb.
The dictionary says that.
Right.
Great. So then Rashi has what to go on. Matt.
Okay, so can you hear me?
Yeah.
So I guess my question, what Rashi question is why, if what Leonard just said, if the seh can be either one, then it goes on to say, take it from the sheep and from the goats. Why do you need to say that? Well, where else are you going to take it? You're not going to take it from the cows.
Meaning, if it's so clear that that's what seh means, why min hakvasim min hayizim? That's what you're asking? Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So your question might suggest that even if the dictionary now says that seh means either, that we learn that from this verse, possibly, right? Like, again, this is the document from which our people learn Hebrew. I mean, I know it like used Hebrew to create the document, but maybe it was not 100% clear that seh could mean both. Yeah. Barry, Stevie, and then we'll see if we have time to read a Rashi.
So sheep. So they were all shepherds. But a goat evokes Abraham and the sacrifice, and it was a goat that appeared, right?
A ram.
A ram. Oh, a ram is of what category? Is that a sheep?
More like a sheep, right? I think it's a male sheep.
Okay. Ram is a baby sheep.
That's right.
I withdraw.
A ram is a Dodge.
Ram is from Los Angeles.
Thank you, Rebecca. I'm glad someone was listening. Stevie, microphone. We need 9 microphones in this room.
So Ibn Ezra has a fascinating discussion of this question. He brings up the verse in Devarim and Re'eh, B'zavachta Pesach L'Hashem Elokecha Tzonu Vakar, right? That you should slaughter for Pesach to God, to Hashem your God, from the flocks or from the herds. And that the Karaites interpret this as saying that Pesach Mitzrayim had to be a sheep or a lamb, but in the generations, right, Pesach in Israel, you could also bring a bull. But he says that these Karaites are wrong, and he's like midrashically adds in the words, right? Chayav uvakar l'shlamim. Right, that like the sown is required, and the from the herds would only be extra food,
filling in.
But yeah, so there is apparently this whole debate as to between the Rabbinites and the Karaites as to what animals you could bring to Pesach at the generations, including large animals potentially.
Right, and just there it shows you that the Karaites have a more interpretive tradition than the Samaritans. The fact they're even like discussing it out and fleshing it out. They don't follow our Talmudic conclusions, but they're not the Samaritans. Right? Great. Marshall. And then I promise you we're going to read a Rashi. Marshall, get a microphone. Take a mic. Was there one right in front of you, Stevie, and you pointed that one? So there's one right there. The same action would have just been to. Go ahead, Marshall.
Since Stevie made reference to Ibn Ezra, we're talking about whether it's goat or lamb, right? Interesting comment from him. Gam se yikare min ha'izim, ki chen katuv se kavasim v'se izim. That's from Devarim chapter 14.
Rashi is going to bring us right there in a second. Okay, so with that in mind, let's give the microphone back to Sandy, and let's read. Rashi has 3 or 4 comments on this verse. Could we give Sandy the mic?
No. Sandy.
Tamim, below mum.
Okay, so he translates tamim as meaning what?
Without a flaw.
Without a flaw, right? You could ask, why does he need to translate it that way? Could tamim mean anything else? And the answer is maybe tamim could mean like whole as opposed to, I don't know, less than whole. But here it means without a physical blemish, in case you thought it might mean something else. Okay. Ben Shana. He says something that might not be intuitive.
Okay. Ben Shana. Kol shnato karui ben shana, kelomar shenolad beshana zo.
Okay, what does that mean?
That for the whole first year, you call it a ben shana, that it was born in that year.
Right. In English, you might call that a yearling, right? Isn't that right? So think of like thoroughbred racing, right? Like you have to be a 3-year-old to go in the Kentucky Derby. That doesn't mean your birthday, the horse's birthday was at the Kentucky Derby. I think it means any animal, I believe, in between its second and third year. Anyone know anything about horse racing? It's something like that, right?
January 1st is the birthday of all horses.
It's like Tu B'Shvat, right? January 1st. So whenever you were born, if the horse is born in November, by January 1st, it's now a year old. Right. So similar thing, that really is why we have Tu B'Shvat, right? It's a notion of a kind of a fiscal calendar for the agriculture, and that no matter when a certain tree was planted, for all the mitzvot that are obligatory for planting trees, like Orla, and there are different Rosh Hashanahs. In fact, Masechet Rosh Hashanah in the Talmud really has nothing to do with Rosh Hashanah. It has to do with the many Rashi Hashanah, the many new years that the rabbinic calendar had, including, most importantly, the agricultural ones. So Rashi is saying Ben Shana does not mean that it was a year old that day, but up to a year. I'm going to tell you show you another example of how more frummy translations of the Torah translate incorporating Rashi. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. It's just a thing. So this is Chabad's translation on the screen of the verse, not the translation of the Rashi. Chabad translates the verse, you shall have a perfect male lamb in its first year, right? In its year. So Chabad turns the English of the verse into an English that would agree with Rashi's commentary. Now, it might be accurate, but it's not necessarily the only way to translate the verse itself. I imagine our school says the same thing. Within its first year. Saperstein, how does Saperstein translate the verse?
Within its first year.
Within its first year. Now let's compare that. Let's see if Everett Fox says the same thing.
Mitsuda says yearling.
Yearling. Are we in verse 5?
Yeah.
Okay. So Everett Fox, I'll share the screen. A holy sound, that's how he renders tamim, male, year-old lamb shall be yours. So his rendering is more accurate to what the Hebrew words look like, but Saperstein and Chabad and Mitsuda are taking into account the common interpretation of the verse, which is Rashi's. Who's right? Who knows? Rachel, let's give Rachel a microphone.
I was just thinking of the previous verse and the discussion of how much meat for how many people.
Yeah.
And wondering when we were talking about a yearling being within the first year rather than greater than 1 year, how big an animal are we talking about? Lambs can be very small.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know the size, like 2 Paddingtons, maybe. but with 8 legs, not 4. Norm.
Silverman translates it as a male of the first year.
Of the first year,
and
yeah.
I just, since we're almost at 9:30, I want to point out to everybody that if God willing, God rebuilds the temple in the next 2 months, and many of us are ordering lamb to be slaughtered and shipped to us, and that you need to count, everybody will need to have 2 kazesim, one for Rashi Class Pesach and another for Korech in the Hillel sandwich, which, as my song says, will be a treat.
Yes. Well, I will need to order seitan that was mixed within that year. Stevie, Leonard, and Renee, I see your hand up, and Rebecca, we might go over for a few minutes. If people have to leave, I won't take it personally.
Just quickly, that Leviticus has a law that you should never slaughter an animal that's still nursing. So at least if we follow that, then it can't be, that small. It has to at least be, a few weeks old in order to not be nursing.
Does anyone know how long a goat or a sheep nurses? I have no idea.
6 weeks.
6 weeks. And then they get the pacifier.
I don't know. I heard once as an explanation for cheese on Shavuos that, like, if they're born at Pesach time, because that's the spring, then they'll be, milk will suddenly become available again around Shavuos.
Oh, interesting.
No milk for, the period in between because all the animals were nursing.
That's a better explanation than that the laws of Fleshix are too complicated.
It's also a little bit too convenient. It might not fit the facts of actual nursing period times, but anyway, and also that some scholars interpret the phrase not to see the kid in its mother's milk as a poetic version of the same law in Leviticus.
Meaning not to kill it while it's still nursing from that milk.
Right. That is one speculative interpretation that, it according to the classic breakdown of biblical criticism of documentary hypothesis, the 3 times that law appears are in the J, E, and D texts. And they say, well, why does the P text not have it? And they say, well, the P text does have it, but it has it in, regular words and not in poetry. But again, that is disputed. It's not like a consensus opinion. It's just a theory that's thrown out there.
Well, to quote my dear teacher, Rabbi Eliezer Diamond, who just retired from JTS after teaching Talmud Halakha for decades, he says, I don't really think I know what the Torah meant when it said, Lo tevashel gedi b'chalei v'imo, do not boil a kid in his mother's milk, but I don't think it meant 2 dishwashers. Leonard.
According to Exodus 22:29, an animal is acceptable for sacrifice once it's 8 days old.
B'yom hashmini v'hala yiratzeh. Yeah. Rebecca?
On the point of why a male versus a female sheep or goat, I see that between 6 and 8 months of age, a female sheep can have babies. So if they're going to have it be all the way up to a year old, you don't want a pregnant sheep to be sacrificed.
Great. Before Renee finishes off, just I put on the screen a note that Everett Fox adds into his translation of Tamim. He translated Tamim as the hyphenated holy sound or hail, and he adds that is physically unblemished. This primary physical meaning of Tamim often gives way to a spiritualized one, Ish Tzadik Tamim Haya B'Toratav, in reference to human beings. Job, for instance, is described as Tamim, variously translated as blameless and perfect. So there's a crossover from the physical blemishlessness to the spiritual. Renee, take us home.
You beat me to the punch. That's what I was going to say.
Oh, sorry.
But also,
say something else.
Baby goats and kids nurse for 6 to 8 weeks.
Baby go 6 to 8 weeks. Got it. Great stuff, folks. It's fun. I mean, this is always fun, but it's fun to be in verses that we all relate to ritually on some level, because even though our Seder is very different than that Seder, this is not obscure material. Have a great week. See you soon. Happy Wednesday.
You've been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am, Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.